Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. Tonight we're going to talk about a book called Warriors Don't Cry. Actually, we're going to talk about adapting the book to the stage. Warriors Don't Cry is a civil rights memoir written by Dr. Melba Patilla Beals. She is one of the Little Rock Nine who integrated Central High School in Little Rock in 1957. With me tonight are the actor, actress, and the director of the stage performance that we are developing at the Bushnell. Please join me in welcoming, to my right, Almeria Campbell. Thanks very much for being here, Almeria.
No problem.
And Richard Avon, the director. Richard, thanks very much, because both of you came up from New York to be here on the show, and I greatly appreciate that. A little bit of background for the audience, because we've been living with this for quite a while, but need to give it a little background. Warriors Don't Cry, as I mentioned, is a civil rights memoir, and for the last 2 years, Scott Galbraith, who is the Vice President of Programs at the Bushnell, Scott and I have been working on adapting the book for a one-woman show to be performed on the stage. The process has been rewarding. It has been challenging. We have involved the community several times to talk about their interests and what they think is relevant or not relevant in terms of the story, in terms of the issues and themes raised in the story. So tonight, well, let me say at another point, Scott is going to be on the show with me to talk about the whole process of adapting a book of more than 200 pages into a script that will play for approximately an hour. But for tonight, I want to talk about another aspect of the adaptation, and that is, what does it take then to get that story on the stage? That's why I have the actor and the director here with me. So let's start here. When Scott and I approached both of you about the piece, I want to know from each of you, what was it about Warriors Don't Cry that made you say, yes, that sounds like something I'd want to do? Richard, let me start with you.
Well, it was a project first, so it was work. But it's an important project in terms of the social message that's involved and the relevance of something that happened in 1957 to a world that's 40-some years later. Yeah. So there's that knowledge that art can be political and can have a purpose and will serve the community in some way.
Yeah, I understand that very much so. One of the reasons we chose the piece for everything you just said. So Almeria, let me ask you, when we talked with you about the piece, knowing this was going to be a one-woman show, multiple characters, and then there's obviously the subject matter, what made you say yes?
Well, I think as an actor, you choose to do a one-person show for growth. But the subject matter was very near and dear to my heart because it deals with racism in this country, and the fact that I don't think that the youth of today really understand racism the way it was in this country 30 years ago. They don't really have an idea of what racism really is. They're very nonchalant and lackadaisical about it, I think, in a lot of regards, because words that were once very offensive to African Americans are used very nonchalantly. And you could say that that is progress for we as a people, but I really feel like it's a slap in the face because they don't really understand the pain that the words inflicted upon the people that they were used on. I really don't think they quite understand.
You bring up, I think, one of the key points that came out of the community forums that we had held at the Bushnell, one in the fall of 2009 and then again in the summer of 2010. As we were preparing for this show, we wanted to get input from the community. We wanted them to talk to us about what did they feel the issues were, what was the relevancy of a civil rights story from 1957, what relevance was there today. And we also particularly wanted to talk with them, something Almeria you just brought up, language. This show uses language that is historically accurate for that time period. That means the N-word is used. And it is used with all of the emotion, the vitriol, the hatred that accompanied it during that time period. And the comment, one of the big comments that we received from the community forums was that people my age and older who lived through that time were concerned and in some cases offended that the youth of today had no appreciation for the power to instill fear that that word had. So I would like to talk a little bit about that because this play does liberally use that N-word. So Almeria, I know early on in our conversations, you talked about having had a conversation with your parents, telling them that you'd been offered this role. Could you tell us a little bit about what their comments were relative to their experience during the civil rights movement?
Well, they were really excited for me, but you know, my parents went to school during integration in the South, and their story is not that of Dr. Beals in that hers was very much a story of torture and pain, and my parents didn't have to face that because of the types of schools they were integrating. You know, Central High was creme de la creme. So in that regards, they didn't have to face as much turmoil. And I asked my mother, I said, well, were there parents out there protesting or chanting? And she said, no, they weren't, simply because it was school. It was about you going to get an education. But what they did do is they stopped a lot of sports because they didn't want their girls to feel endangered with contact-to-contact activities.
Oh.
So in a lot of regards, like sports activities and dances were canceled, but everything else resumed as normal. And she said white students talked to them and things of that nature. It wasn't as hostile. But the fact is that integration in several parts of the South was met with a lot of hostility. And so
I know when I went to high school in the 60s, I went to a small, a small Catholic school down in Virginia that had been integrated since it was founded in the late 1800s. Integration was just always part of the school, but that's not the way it was in the rest of the city, not at all. And there was violence, and there were people were afraid on both sides, and there were all the issues of same kind of issues I find us talking about today. In the news this morning about the achievement, or not the achievement gap, but the achievement gap in Connecticut between students in poorer community schools and students in the more affluent schools. And our gap of 20% is the highest in the country. And that leads to that whole discussion about equal access to education, which was at the heart of all of this. I mean, Melba Beals, 15 years old, talks about wanting to have access, to a good school. So I see that as certainly as relevancy for today. But taking that whole idea, that's a big concept, it's a big story, it's a potent story, and we're bringing it down to say, show me the story, dramatize the story for me with one actress playing multiple roles. So first, Almeria, tell me some of the roles you play in the piece.
Well, I play Melba.
And she's 15.
She's 15. I do play her grandmother, India. I think she's my favorite.
I just love I love how you portray her.
Oh yeah, I love Grandma India. Mother Lois.